Why does God send us trials? It's an excellent question. You don't go through life without experiencing hardships, pain, disappointment, frustration. So if God is all good and He's all powerful, then why? Now, before we get into this question, I know that there are Christians out there that don't believe that God disciplines His children, that don't believe that God actually sends trials. Whether it's they think that Satan sends the trials or we bring them upon ourselves. Either way, that conversation is beyond the scope of this video that I do plan to cover in the future. So just play the hypothetical with me that at least if God is truly sovereign, then He does have to allow these trials to happen. Whether they come from Him or not, once again, we'll talk in a different video, but for now, just go with the assumption that He does have to at least allow these trials to happen. So to begin addressing this question, we have to start with the proper framework, and we have to remember that God's ways are higher than our ways. And what that means is there will always be some level of disconnect between an infinite being who can see into eternity, future, past, present, and us with finite minds trying to comprehend this being that is so different than us. So all of these questions need to be approached with a certain level of humility on our end, but that is not a reason not to explore these questions and not to continue learning and seeking Him and seeking wisdom. Quite the contrary, actually, because it's an infinite well of wisdom and knowledge and understanding that we have however much time the Lord gives us to spend seeking ultimate truth. One other thing to remember is that there is always a purpose. So no hardship, no unfortunate circumstance will ever be without an eternal purpose. More often than not, we will not have answers, or at least good answers, in this life, but we can rest in God's promises that Romans 8:28, that all things will work together for good for those who are called according to God's purpose. So, take heart in knowing that whatever you're going through, it is for a reason, and you may not be able to figure that reason out, but God has one and He is good. A few quick examples of purposes. So one could be to get our attention. I think a lot of us could admit when things go well and life is easy, it's somewhat human nature to just forget about God or to, focus on the world and present things when you compare that with when you're struggling, you're going through real pain and depression, that we're forced to be on our knees and cry out to God, to rely on Him and His power and His strengths. So a lot of times He can use those tragic or terrible events to shift our attention back on Him. I think another example would be how many amazing testimonies that the Christian church has from people who have gone through horrible events and terrible tragedies, and they've come through the other side with amazing testimonies, and they come through with a peace and a wisdom and an understanding and a compassion that someone who hasn't walked through that just can't really know or can't experience on that level. So the testimonies that people have from hardships and disasters are a very real thing, and they can often reach the lost with those powerful testimonies. Also, we need to remember that God has a much higher purpose and calling on our life than just our comfort and our happiness. I think so much of American culture is just focused on being successful and comfortable and happy and having an easy and happy life, when in all reality, we're called to take the gospel to the lost. We're called to be the salt of the earth. We're called to be a city on a hill. And what that means is we're called to stand out and to look different and to die to ourselves, to sacrifice our own selfish ambition and desire, and to have a heart for the lost, and to serve and to be about Christ and His Word and building up the church and being in Christian community. And it's just, when you think about what's to come in heaven and that hope, it really is crazy how easy it is for us to spend all of our time and energy focusing on this life. And I get it, I struggle with this all the time, but It's very important to remember that God's ultimate purpose for us in this life is not our happiness or our comfort. When you look at verses like 1 Peter 3:8, it tells us point blank that these trials will test our devotion to the Lord. Once again, a lot of people don't like to hear this, including Christians. They think, oh, God wouldn't test me, he just wants me to love him. But we need to put our own thoughts and our own view of God aside and get in the Word and see what God actually says about these matters. It actually says in that same verse that these trials strengthen our faith, which is the most important aspect of our life. So we should be thankful when these trials come because, as I said, they have a purpose and they are meant to strengthen our faith. In 2 Corinthians, this verse actually tells us that these trials are meant to equip us so that we can help other believers. Once again, there's a purpose and there's a compassion that people have when they go through these trials if they seek the Lord through them and remain faithful and steadfast. And so ultimately, it's just not about this life. Our home is in heaven. We are called to be citizens of heaven. Right now, we are strangers and sojourners in a foreign land. But Satan has many of us deceived, at times myself included, and we are very comfortable in the world. We look just like the world. We love the things of the world, and that's where in sanctification we need to become more like Christ and let go of this life and put our hope in heaven and things to come. And so that's why it's so important to wake up every day and to seek the Lord and to walk closely with Him, because if you don't, Satan will absolutely distract you and deceive you, and you're going to become just like everybody else. And so hopefully with these key points, you have a few takeaways. So when you're talking to non-believers or even Christians that are struggling with their faith, you can have a couple of simple points to share and to talk about and biblical reasons for why God sends trials.